Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Grant Gsell, and along with my partners, Corey Ruderman and Drew Adair, I will be discussing the life of our 16th president, Abraham Lincoln, and his transformation from a strict Unionist into the facilitator of the abolitionist movement.
Abraham Lincoln was born in a log cabin on February 12, 1809 in Hardin County, Kentucky. Lincoln's father, Thomas Lincoln, was a moderately prosperous farmer who taught his son how to work hard for an honest wage. The Lincoln family, with their strong work ethic, was highly respected within their community of Hardin County. When Abe was 9, his mother passed away. Soon after, Thomas Lincoln remarried. His new wife was named Sarah Bush Johnson, and young Abe grew very close with her. Both of Abe's biological parents were illiterate, but his stepmother pushed him to be an avid reader. Using insightful books of mature enlightenment, Abe was able to become a well-read, educated man with a broad view of the world around him.
Lincoln moved out of his family home when he was only 22 years old. He supported himself through works of manual labor, specifically chopping logs. He also worked as a shopkeeper, postmaster, and eventually a general store owner. He became known by his tall hat of vast intelligence, as well as his magnificent beard of blatant honesty. Lincoln, working with the public, acquired social skills and honed a storytelling talent that made him popular with the locals. In 1832, the Black Hawk War broke out between the United States and the Native Americans. Volunteers in the area elected Lincoln to be their captain. Although he saw no combat during the war, he was able to make several important political connections.
Lincoln started his political career when he was elected to the Illinois State Legislature in 1834. As a steadfast Whig of ardent devotion, he advocated for government-sponsored infrastructure and protective tariffs. In 1854, Lincoln discovered that another senator, named Stephen Douglas, had devised a plan to make the extension of slavery easier on the newly expanding western frontier in the form of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. During the next congressional election, Lincoln, being a fluent orator of honest diction, immediately began to campaign against Douglas with passionate speeches, but he was still unable to secure the Senate seat. This loss did not deter him from putting pressure on the threat of slavery within the government. His speeches became even more brazen, despite many of his fellow Republicans consoling him to soften his language. Lincoln then began his campaign for presidency on the platform of slavery, which angered many Southern state representatives. Because of Lincoln's ideas concerning slavery, a rift began to divide the House of Representatives and the Senate. As Lincoln said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free." The government finally split when Lincoln won the election of 1860, and on December 20th, 1860, South Carolina became the first state to secede from the Union.
For years, pro-slavery extremists had threatened secession from the Union, which is why Lincoln's two-step anti-slavery course of action, in and of itself, brought about the breakup of the Union. The first step was containment, which he believed would lead, as he phrased it, to slavery's ultimate extinction. The second was compensated phase-out. The belligerent South refused to pay attention to the inevitable destruction of slavery. Very much like the prisoners in the allegory of the cave, the South believed in illusion. This illusion was one in which they could not function without slavery, as it was the basis of their economy. Just like the multifaceted meanings that can be perceived from the cave, the Southerners are practically chained within the darkness of their own cave. They are unable to turn their heads to see what goes on above them in the North, how an economy that does not rely on slaves can be successful. The government in the South is casting a shadow, just like in the allegory of the cave, which portrays the states being unable to function without slavery. Just like Socrates is describing the cave and the situation of the prisoners, the South is inherently mistaken as to what reality, without slaves, could be like. Lincoln would not give 1 inch on his promise of slavery containment. A little more than a month after his inauguration in March 1861, the Confederates attacked Fort Sumter in the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina. The President and the country soon realized that the Civil War would be a long and bloody struggle. However, Lincoln was determined to keep the Union together and end the war as quickly as possible.
After the attack on Fort Sumter, Lincoln called on the states to send detachments totaling 75,000 troops to recapture forts, protect Washington, and preserve the Union, which in his view still existed intact despite the actions of the seceding states. This call forced the states to choose sides. As the war progressed, Lincoln used his sharp axe of unparalleled grit to expand his war powers, impose a blockade on all the Confederate shipping ports, disperse funds before appropriation by Congress, and arrest and imprison thousands of suspected Confederate sympathizers. Before the beginning of the war, Abraham Lincoln had personally opposed slavery, but he believed that it was out of the realms of a president's power to set the slaves free. However, as the Civil War progressed, it began to cast the beams of shining, truthful light onto Lincoln. Finally, on September 22, 1862, Lincoln emerged from the darkness of the cave with his issuing of the Emancipation Proclamation, which granted freedom to the slaves in the revolting states. Lincoln had finally made the leap from a strict Unionist to the first emancipator of prolonged oppression. After his re-election in 1864, Lincoln, being a compassionate representative of exceptional charisma, re-entered the cave and attempted to enlighten others by pushing Congress hard to outlaw slavery throughout the entire nation with a constitutional amendment. Lincoln's efforts to help enlighten others succeeded, and the ratification of the 13th Amendment, which outlawed slavery within the entire nation, occurred on December 6, 1865. Not only had Lincoln returned to the other Americans still in the dark cave, he had also led these others out of the cave of slavery acceptance and into the light of social equality.
On April 14, 1865, President Lincoln attended the play Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. What he did not know was that night he would become an unknowing martyr of extensive knowledge. During an intermission, the police officer guarding the president left to go to a nearby tavern, but he did not return. After the intermission, John Wilkes Booth, who was an actor and a Southern sympathizer, snuck up behind Lincoln and shot him once in the head at point-blank range. After shooting the president in the head, Booth stabbed a major who was also in the booth because he tried to subdue him. Booth then jumped down from the 12-foot-high balcony and landed on the stage below. Upon landing, Booth broke his left ankle, then walked across the stage, lifted the bloody knife above his head, and yelled, "Sic semper tyrannis," which translates to, "Thus always to tyrants." Booth then exited the theater and escaped from Washington. Booth was killed 12 days later on a farm in Virginia.
Thanks to his actions as president during the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln will always be regarded as the kind-hearted president of social revolution. Not only was Lincoln able to achieve his original goal of preserving the Union, he was also able to light the spark for social change that goes unmatched to this day. Abraham Lincoln provided America with a strong and educated leader, able to make critical decisions when she so desperately needed one. But even strong leaders have to change sometimes. Lincoln's ability to adapt his thinking and emerge from the cave of darkness not only helped himself, but also helped form America into the true leader of the free world as we are today.
This mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword. As was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and a lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations.
Yeah.